The next episodes of Thriving Construction come straight from Future Build. Huge thanks to Eco Cocoon. The space was great for chats, acoustics, and even better well-being.
Was a really interesting metric that came out of, I believe it was KPMG, when they had done an entire retrofit using healthy paint and healthy materials, all Cradle certified materials. The reduction in sick days were, I think it was 2.4 days per person on average for the years. They quantified that they saved 3 million in year one. So your savings are not necessarily just points of purchase. If you're saving on operational costs, like human costs, which are usually the biggest cost when you're running a company or an office, it's a no-brainer. So there was another similar scenario where a developer was developing to sell low-cost residential units, and they had their particular template, low cost, and a few nice elements to hit the aesthetic bar. And what they did is they used cradle-to-cradle certified options and non-cradle-to-cradle certified options, and they offered the buyers the choice. They said it's going to cost you, I think it was 2,000 or 3,000 more, or you can buy the cheap and cheerful one. Most people, 80%, went for the cradle-to-cradle certified option, paid the 2 or 3% more, and they'd actually built in extra profit. So they made 80% more on the cradle-to-cradle certified housing. So there are a lot of ways of looking at this. It's not just the cost of the material. If you can accrue a better profit, or in case of an owner-managed scenario for offices, if you can keep the costs of your staff down and save that, it's a no-brainer.
The other thing that was in my mind as well are places like hospitals.
Yes.
And places where people go to get better. So those hospitals might be A&E or wards, or it may be like a psychiatric. I'm wondering how clued in they are on cradle to cradle and on focusing on the materials that are actually being used in these buildings to support and help the ends that they're trying to work to with helping people to recover from injury or disease.
Darren, that is probably the worst of the bunch, because a lot of the hospitals are on a very small budget, and a lot of them are repeating the same sort of materials they've used over the last set of decades. When I studied optimizing human health, that was one of the case studies that I looked at, was hospitals. And to be fair, they have quite a rigorous set of rules about what materials they may or may not use, because they have to have they can't use tiles in many spaces because of grouting and bacteria. They've got to use a lot of easy, clean surfaces and a lot of no spaces between surfaces as far as possible. So they do use things like PVC, which is a neurotoxin. It affects 6 of our bodily functions. It affects our brain, affects our heart, affects our liver, affects and they will use a PVC in hospitals. Now, there are alternatives to PVC, but a lot of people don't even know that it's a toxin. So the short answer to that is, in hospitals, it's actually quite dismal. When I walk around and I see PVC, this and that, and we know the direct opposite is the most helpful for rehabbing clients and can shave up to 3 days off a client's time in a hospital. Most of it is healthy natural materials, particularly wood, stone, paint that has a matte, almost a lime finish, if you like. It's quite interesting because, and the evidence isn't quite sure about why all of these things are true. But if you walk around and you touch something that looks like wood, but you feel it and it's a laminate and it's a plastic, it doesn't support our immune system to get well. And I can't tell you more than that, because they don't really know why. So it could be just that that's ingrained in us, that's part of how we expect to touch wood, and it's got to feel like wood. We expect to touch stone, it's got to feel like stone. But things like natural light, plants, flowers, the smells of natural plants and flowers. So it's a whole range of things. It's not just olfactory, it's tactile, which is very, very powerful. The tactile one is very, very important. And it literally affects our wellness days. But no, you can go into hospitals and you'll look around, you'll see plastic paints off-gassing toxins. You'll see perspex. I went into a children's hospital and they just had done a huge big redo. And I was literally doing my thesis on all this. And there was just toxins everywhere. And I could have cried. colors that they'll say, the kids like colors. Well, actually, yes, they might like colors, but if you know that's actually going to disrupt their immune system, which is already compromised, which is why they're in hospital, why would you do that?
So it seems like from what you're saying then that the spaces in hospitals are actually making people sick.
I would say they're adding to the negative effects on compromised immune systems. They are certainly not helping. Hard to quantify. Does that add days on? What is that effect? But I asked this question of a chemist. There's only about 5 toxicological chemists in the world that are really up there and do Cradle to Cradle certified work. Brilliant people. And I asked them the similar question. And what they said is the range of toxins that we breathe and ingest on a daily basis is huge. We literally live in petri dishes of toxins. And those combinations of toxins they are unable to test that they're so rife.
So the individual, you can test that, but the impact of the mixture, that's impossible to test at the moment.
Inquantifiable, right. Absolutely. But all they can see is the outcomes. So the outcomes is that diseases on a rapid rise, and in certain population groups, certain diseases on a rise that is increased. And there are guesses and there are studies out which have some answers that speak to those problems and those outcomes. But the bottom line is we are indoors, especially in urban environments, around 90% of the time. So if you're breathing air that is off-gassing from carpets, from formaldehyde, from OSB boards and materials that are built into our sofas and into our furniture, all the fire retardancies that are on most of our soft furnishings, all of this kind of stuff is around us constantly. I mean, I read this morning that literally drinking tea, the tea leaves absorb a huge amount of the metal toxins. The tea leaves will actually pull out a lot of the toxic metals. So drinking tea is just, it's a small thing to do, but it's actually a brilliant thing to do. So it's really important to actually think about the materials that we use, not only for our own selfish reasons, for my body, for your body, for our kids' bodies, but also generationally, because most people don't stay in one home their entire lives. There's a transition. And in places like leisure and commerce, they transition their interiors usually on average 6 years. In London, there's a whole new interior that's being designed. So for these spaces, I just think that you have a personal obligation. I think it's negligent if you use toxic materials when there are alternatives.
Yeah, and I think as well it's about knowing what those alternatives are. So you've mentioned that there's an alternative to PVC, but I didn't know that. What is the alternative to PVC?
There are actually lots of alternatives to UPVC. UPVC is one alternative to PVC.
Right.
So, for example, in poles and piping for sewerage, you can use UPVC. There's some brilliant companies like Rehau, and they've made some pole products. So Hydro and Rehau are two that come to mind that have made some really great alternatives. And then there's a whole range of flooring, which can be many different materials that are a direct healthy option to PVC. I mentioned Sikosonofil earlier. They have made a roof membrane. Roof membranes are typically PVC. They've made it out of a combination of rubber and polyurethane and a few other mixes, but it's almost like a rubber compound. So fully waterproof, fully healthy. If that abrades, which PVC does abrade, it's like a polymer, it's like a plastic. It abrades, it gets into the air, it gets into the soil, it gets into our lungs. Do you know how much plastic you have in your brain currently?
Right now?
Would you like to know?
Tell me, please.
The average brain has an average of about a teaspoon of plastic.
And how did it get there?
Mostly breathing and eating. So if you take plastic lunchboxes, if you take takeaways in plastic containers, commonly, buy takeaway sandwich in a plastic wrapper. So it comes usually in through ingestion and inhalation.
Thanks for watching to the end. I think that you'll like this, but before you do that, just make sure that you've commented and liked below, and also that you've subscribed.